Barça has shaken up the transfer market and now there's something changing around the club. And we're not talking about just one signing, we're not even talking about two. We're talking about a feeling that hasn't existed around Barça for years. The feeling that Barça is Barça again. Because while half of Europe is trying to figure out what Deco is doing, the sporting management is working at a speed that's surprising even people within football itself. And watch out, because signing players is one thing, but signing exactly what your coach needs is something completely different. And that's where this story begins, because when Hansi Flick arrived at Barça, he was very clear about one thing: the talent was already there. Pedri, Cubarsí, Gavi, Fermín, Rafinha. The foundation was there, but something was missing. Intensity was missing, depth was missing, experience was missing, competitiveness was missing, players ready to win big matches were missing. And precisely because of that, the names that are coming up are not a coincidence, because when you analyze one by one the players linked to Barça, you discover something very interesting. And that's not a coincidence, that's planning. Because Anthony Gordon is not like Bernardo Silva, and Bernardo Silva is not like Julián Álvarez. But all three have something in common. They compete like animals, and that's exactly what Flick wants. But wait, because that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is that this summer could end up being remembered for many years. Not because of a transfer, not because of a signing, but because of the exact moment when Barça decided to rebuild a team ready to conquer Europe. And here comes Anthony Gordon, because he's probably the player who best represents the new Barça that Flick has in mind. A lot of people look at him and see a winger, a fast, direct, intense footballer. And yes, all of that is true, but Gordon is much more than that, because when you analyze his statistics, you understand why he generates so much excitement within the club. One of the players who presses the most, one of those who wins the ball back the most, one of those who runs the most. And in today's football, that's worth its weight in gold, because the great teams not only attack well, they also recover quickly, suffocate, chase, bite, and that's where Gordon fits perfectly. That's why they like him so much, that's why Barça is willing to make a big effort for him, and that's why Flick believes he can become a key player. Because just imagine for a moment a high press formed by Gavi, Fermín, Rafinha, and Gordon. That's exactly the kind of football that the German coach goes crazy for. And here's something important, because Gordon wouldn't come to replace anyone, he would come to raise everyone's level. Because when competition increases, players get better, and that can make a team that's already competing at the highest level even stronger. But pay attention, because if Gordon represents the future, the next name represents something completely different. He represents experience, he represents leadership, he brings trophies, he represents a winning mentality. Bernardo Silva. Honestly, it's getting harder to find a move that makes sense, since we're talking about a player who's won almost everything: Premier League, Champions League, Cups, Finals, and tough matches. Jackpot. League, Champions, Copas, Finales, Partidos Imposibles. He also knows perfectly well what it means to compete under pressure, because it's one thing to talk about winning, and a very different thing to have actually won. And Bernardo has been doing it for years. That's why his possible arrival is generating so much interest. Because this Barça is young, very young. And that has many advantages, but it also has risks, especially when it comes to the big Champions League nights. The moments where experience matters. And that's where Bernardo could be fundamental, because we're not just talking about quality. We're talking about someone who knows exactly what to do when the nerves kick in, and that has enormous value. Also, there's another detail that I find very interesting, because Bernardo is no longer the footballer he was 5 or 6 years ago. He has evolved. Now he reads space better, he plays more centrally, he participates more in the build-up, he wins the ball back more. And he has become a much more complete player. That's why Flick is open to this possibility, because it wouldn't just be a signing. He would be a tremendous tactical tool. And here comes an interesting question. Because the answer is usually the second one. And that's where deals like Bernardo's make even more sense. Because seasons are won in April and May, not in September. And to make it to April alive, you need depth. You need alternatives. You need quality on the bench. And Bernardo guarantees you exactly that. The name that can completely change the scope of the project, Julián Álvarez. Because when Julián appears, the conversation changes. We're no longer just talking about a great player. We're talking about one of the most complete forwards in the world. A footballer who can score, assist, press, link up, and attack spaces. And show up in the big matches. Because if there's something that defines Julián, it's precisely that. His ability to compete when the pressure is at its highest. And that is extremely valuable because champion teams need players like that. Players who are able to show up when the stage gets huge. And Julián has been proving for years that he belongs to that group. That's why he's so well liked. That's why he creates so much excitement. And that's why he continues to be one of the most talked about names in the transfer market. Now then, there's something even more important. And the thing is that when you put Gordon, Bernardo, and Julián together, you really start to understand what Flick is trying to build. Because these aren't isolated moves. They're not random names thrown around. They're pieces of the same puzzle. A puzzle that has a very clear idea behind it. More intensity, more pressure, more competitiveness, more experience, more hunger, more European pedigree. And that's the key. Because Barça already has talent. A lot of talent. What they're trying to add now is something else. Winning mentality. And honestly, when you look at the profiles they're interested in, when you see how they fit, and when you imagine it all together on the field, you start to understand why there's so much excitement around this summer. Because the goal doesn't seem to be just improving the squad. The goal seems much more ambitious. To build a team capable of looking anyone in the eye again. A team capable of competing against Bayern, against PSG, against City, against anyone. And that's probably the most important news of all. Because beyond names, beyond rumors, beyond specific deals, the feeling is that Barça once again has a very clear direction. And when a club has talent, it has a coach with a defined idea. And also manages to bring in people and profiles that fit exactly into that idea. Usually big things happen. Very big things. And that's why this summer could end up being remembered as the summer when something much more important began than just a transfer window. The summer when Barça decided to rebuild a team ready to conquer Europe.